We see some thumbs up. Yeah, I hope that everyone had a great week. You're back here with us on Sunday night, so that's a good sign. Thank you so much for being here. Chad, it's great to see you. It's crazy we're right down the street from each other and I don't get to see you.
Right.
I feel like David, you might have seen Chad today though.
I did.
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, we're grateful for everyone choosing to be with us tonight, and we will go ahead and get started with our weekly words of wisdom from Tim. Sir,
Thanks, Cecilia.
of course.
Good to see everybody. You're in for a great night. So like that. I want to add a story to the one we had last week. And I think it's important that the words of wisdom aren't that it's something you can go tomorrow and start doing immediately. You don't have to go through different levels to get to, I don't know, the right to do it. This is good stuff. I think some of you who've attended Consumer Institute know that one of the key aspects of that is what a group of people called the Purple Angels. And these are volunteers who work all week long. Most of them are band directors or college students getting ready to graduate and so forth. And they're and most of them have taken the leadership class twice, sometimes 3 times. But the idea is you are going to serve from the get-go till the very end. You know, no time off, you serve. So a few years ago, a director called and he said, I've got the perfect person to be one of the Purple Angels. I'm like, well, there's a waiting list, to try to get in. He goes, no. He said, you've got to give this girl a chance. And I'm like, eh. And I said, well, where is she? College, teaching what? He goes, no, she's just graduating from high school. And I'm like, okay, that's out. No high school. We've got to get somebody that's got some miles on him here. And he goes, oh man, you're not going to be disappointed. And so we went back and forth. And finally we agreed on this. I'll give her 1 day. If she doesn't make it, knowing there wasn't a chance she would make it, then, we'll part good friends and she'll go home. Okay. So we get there. And when I get there, the first person I run into is this young lady. I'll call her Michelle. And she's like, hi, and so forth. Nice to meet you. And she hands me a card, and it's a thank you card for letting her do this. And it was a gift certificate for Starbucks. And I said, what's this about? And she goes, well, you're going to need some caffeine during the week. Ha, ha, ha. And I just didn't want to do it each day. Here's a gift card. Oh, that's kind of nice. Then I watched her when the Purple Angels came in, and they all know each other, and it's sort of a club. They circle the wagons, and it's hard to get it in on the inside of those wagons. She went up and introduced herself to each one and made a point to find out about them. She'd done some research on it. Well, at the end of the first day, there was no question. She not only kept up, she was leading the pack. And when people would come in, she would make a point to get to them, talk to them. And I noticed as the week went on and people would walk across the campus, she'd go, hi, Mr. Miller. It wasn't hi, John, or hi, Frank. It was hi, Mr. Miller. And they would go, hi, Michelle, how are you? I never saw her one time when she wasn't on it. There wasn't a, so she did the same thing with the Purple Angels. She got to know all of them, was doing them favors. So one day went by, there's no way we're going to let her go. She's just too good. The end of the week comes, we do our final wrap up. Everybody hugs each other, kumbaya, we'll see you next year and all that sort of thing. And I just kept watching her because whatever was done, she would put one more little polish on it. So everybody leaves, and Tim, in his control factor, says, I know they all said they got the rooms cleaned up and back in order, but I'm going to make one more check. So I went in the one building, and as I walked in the room, here's Michelle in there. And she has a string, and she's lining up all the desks on this string so everything would be aligned, where the pencils went and so forth. And I just watched. I said, Michelle, what are you doing? Oh, she said, I just want to make one final check to make sure everything's just perfect. I said, come here. Walked over and I said, I have looked for an excuse all week to send you home because I wanted to be right about somebody your age couldn't handle this level of servant leadership. And I said, what's your secret? So here it is. This is the words of wisdom. She said, Dr. Tim, every time I do something, I do it better than I think it needs to be done. Every time we do something, she does it better than it needs to be done. It's not just good enough. It always has to go a couple steps later. Now, you and I can do that when we walk in tomorrow and see our colleagues or some of our kids, or look at the room, or pick up the paper on the floor. I always do things better than I think they need to be done. And those are the words of wisdom about Michelle.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Oh my goodness. Whether it be like our shining star from last week or the purple angels that you're sharing with us today. I love that, Tim, you said just start doing it tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Make it
great.
a habit. Make it a habit.
Indeed. Scott, what other words do you have to share with us? Something that we can start tomorrow.
Well, good evening. I hope you had a fantastic week. Before I give you my tips of the week, I want to just tell you, if you haven't seen the John Williams documentary on Disney Plus, you need to check it out. It is absolutely fantastic. I mean, the power of music and the significance of one. One person can truly make a difference. And it is really, really a great documentary if you haven't seen it. So what I'm going to share with my tips of the week this week are just really simple ideas. They're not lofty. You'd never find them on a doctoral dissertation. These are just some really simple ideas. And they're things about simple tips of conducting. They're 8 things. So the first one is stop counting off for your students. This is a crutch that will lead to bad habits on the part of your student musicians. Number 2, keep your right hand gestures clear and simple. A clear conducting pattern helps tremendously with precision and time. Number 3, try conducting just the musical line and shape. Use the front to back plane to communicate direction, especially with the left hand. Number 4, don't become predictable in your conducting gestures or your interpretation. Students need some consistency, but music making requires the freedom to interpret when recreating the printed notation on the page. What they sound like is more important than what we look like. Number 5, create an environment where initial time is provided by you, the conductor, but synergistic time is felt and inherently kept by the musicians. This allows you to focus on emotions and stylistic qualities. Number 6, video your rehearsals and evaluate your effectiveness, as well as the sounds coming from the ensemble. Are your gestures eliciting the sounds that you desire? Number 7, strive for an interpretation that not only represents the composer's intent, but incorporates wonderment gleaned from the discovery process of score study. And number 8, once you learn the score, this is one of my favorite ones. This is what Larry Livingston absolutely made me do. Once you learn the score, try conducting without it. It is totally liberating. So those are my 8 tips of the week. I'll put them in the chat. And then I think I'm kicking this over to Bobby.
I think so. Hey, everyone. Good evening. I am so excited. I had to really read up on this guy. You may not have heard of him. I've run into him a couple of times over the years. If you don't know who Greg Bimm is, and we have some folks that aren't necessarily ensconced in the band community, so it's my honor to get to introduce you to him. Greg Bimm taught in 2 schools in his career, and most notably, Greg's at 46 years at Marion. Yep. Okay, so just a few. He spent 46 years at Marion Catholic High School. I'm going to read just a couple of things to do this. So under Bimm's direction, Marion Band grew from 70 to over 280 members and built a reputation as one of the premier high school band programs in the U.S., including 7 BOA Grand National Championships, 21 BOA National Class Championships. A lot of people don't know that Marion is the second, at that time was in the second smallest class at BOA. 34 consecutive BOA national finalist appearances, has won, it says here, 42 successive Illinois State marching class championships, but I think it's now 44 because it's been 2 years after you. Is that correct, Greg? So this 24 was the 44.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Yeah. So since the announcement, oh gosh, the person who does Grand Nationals, Dan Potter and shoot, his name just left me, but he would always get
Chuck
to this.
Henson.
Yeah,
Chuck Henson. Yeah.
Sorry, he would always get to this sentence with Marion, and I loved it every time. He would say, Marion Catholic has done this. Marion Catholic has been the Illinois State class champion since 1980. And he would just sort of let that boom for a while. There's so many things that Greg has done. That Marion was one of the first schools to get both the Sudler Shield and the Sudler Flag, which is for marching and for concert. Now we have a lot of program. I think this is the thing that I would say about that. When Greg Bimm was doing that at Marion, you didn't have a lot of schools that were doing concert and marching to a really high degree. And I think he was one of the forerunners of that and has really set the pace for what all of us who are in the job now know you have to do. It's a complete music program or none of it's going to be great. He has been the Stan Berry Award for Young Band Directors in 1983, Sudler Award of Merit, John Philip Sousa Foundation. 95 was the first school band director to conduct the Illinois All-State Band, and I know he's done it again since then. Mary Hoffman Award of Excellence from the Illinois Music Educators. Lowell Mason Fellow from NAFME, Distinguished Service Award from the Archdiocese of Chicago. He was inducted in the inaugural class of the ISU, Illinois State University College of Fine Arts of Fame, and Distinguished Alumni of LaSalle, Peru Township. He's a member of the MFA BOA Hall of Fame. Received an honorary doctorate in music education, and he loves it when you call him Dr. Bimm, so make sure you do that every time. And so if you see him out, just like he'll pretend he doesn't want you to do it, but he really does. So make sure you do it every time. He's presented at Midwest so many times and all over the place and done honor bands everywhere. One of my dearest friends in the world. Everybody, please welcome Mr. Greg Bimm to us tonight.
Bobby, can you keep talking for a little bit? You're making me feel well. I have to say though, before we talk about anything else, happy birthday tomorrow.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And you know how you forgot Chuck Henson's name a minute ago?
Yeah.
Gird up your loins because it's just beginning.
Yeah. So now here's a fun fact about Greg. He may not remember who's in the room right then. He maybe lose the name. But if you ask him, okay, Greg, here we go. I'm going to put you on the spot. It's 1980. Who was your drum major?
Following Canada would have been Carla Cortez and Doris Campagnoni.
He would do stuff like that all the time. He'd be like, oh yeah, in 1996, so-and-so was our lead tuba player, and this and this and this and this. It drove me. And I couldn't remember anything. And anyway, I've got some questions for you, Greg, that I think our listeners would like to do. I'm going to kind of do some lighter ones first, and then some that are a little bit heavier and require a little bit more explanation. So if you've ever been to Midwest or a state convention where Greg Bimm is present, I can tell you where you're going to find him. At the bar. No, he's not there. He's going to be at whatever place has the most scores, and he's just going to be standing there for hours, just going through music. And at the end, he'll walk away with like 3 to 5 scores of things he wants to look at and work on. And every time he comes up with some great pieces. So, Greg, when you're looking at a new score to either conduct or arrange, we should mention that Greg also is a pretty prolific arranger of music as well, with several concert band pieces, and of course he wrote all of Marion's music for most of the years that he was there. What are some of the things you look for when trying to decide if this is a quality piece of literature?
In truth, the first thing is always about the kids, about my band, like how it's going to fit us. That's my life. You know, I can find a Child's Garden of Dreams. That never, I would love to do that, but it never fit us. Like there was always some place that would have put a student in the wrong situation to play. And so one of the big things for me is I just look at how it's going to fit us. I try to look at the melodic and harmonic content. I'm a big person on structure. Like I look for the way that it's pieced together and how it's going to flow. One of the big parts of that too is its balance. A lot of times I'll look at something and I'll go like, man, this is really good. This is really good. This was good a long time ago, and it's still, you know, I'm going to be really frank. Sometimes I look at something and I think that it was a commission that was commissioned to be a 15-minute work, and the composer had like an 8-minute idea, and so they just had to try to need more out of it. And though I like thin pizza crust by rolling it really thin, I don't know that I'm the same way with band music. But structure and balance, and I really love the way to search how pieces are put together. Just yeah, and you can't do that all at Midwest. You know, I love standing there and doing the first search, but I love even more digging even further. One of the things I do too is I look for its why. Like, why does it exist? Sometimes it looks like it's a piece that was written because somebody wanted a paycheck. It was written because it was demanded by a publisher. Like, you did that really well last year. Can you do 3 more next year? And so you can't always tell that just from the first perusal, but I try to look at why it exists and what its meaning is and what its substance is. If I'm going to invest myself as heavily as I do in preparing the music personally, I don't want to do that with something that's thin. Like I just, I can't do that. So I spend a lot of time, at Midwest. One of the great things now, I'm pretty good at looking at stuff and knowing what it's going to be. But one of the really neat things is it's Midwest music, I think is what it's called now. It used to be Schattinger's from down in St. Louis. That's the one that has the biggest bins of scores, and that's just where I go. But they have little what do they call the QR code things now? You can just take your phone, hit the QR code, and hear a recording, and so that makes things much faster, and that just works. And then the final an extension of that is how it's gonna work for me, how it's gonna touch me, and I'll use this term advisedly, how it's going to react with my musical soul. Yeah, I just I'm invested, and so I want to find something that I rightfully can invest myself that deeply in. It's not that we never play anything that's light. There every once in a while we played I don't know, something really heavy one time, and I knew the audience was going to need a break, and so we followed it up with Looney Tunes.
Oh, I remember the piece, Greg. It was the Persiceti Masquerade. that light little number.
Yeah, followed by theme from Rocky and Bullwinkle or something like that. But to extend just a little bit more, I know we don't want to overdo, but when I'm arranging for concert band, I really look hard at whether how it's going to fit for winds. There are some things. I did Medea back in '92, and it fit really, really well. Just the winds in the original played such a heavy role that the string things were very manageable, and the ranges of the string things. The only one problem that we had is there's a drone at the beginning, like an inverted pedal point on a G, I think it is, or something like that. And it just goes on forever. And I wrote it for piccolo. And we actually, the last time we played it, we had a piccolo that it was like a laser and it never moved. I still don't know necessarily how he did it, but it was pretty magnificent. So, uh, uh, but I look for generally how it's going to fit. I've been working on a transcription of a couple of movements from dance panels by Aaron Copland, and one of my favorite movements. It has a little bit of range things where there's a really high string line that I haven't convinced myself that it's okay to leave that an octave lower. But I'm looking at it, trying to when I look at these things, I try to make sure that they're going to translate well, and sometimes it's a vocal thing. I just conducted I Am Not Yours by Randall Stroop yesterday, and that fits really well. The ranges work really well, and it lends itself to different voicings. So that's all part of the consideration too. For marching band, one of the things that I try to see how it's going to fit and how it's going to conform to the structures that we have to do in marching band. The first thing is it's going to have to be, just completely condensed. And so, I'm about to raise my hand. It said, I don't know what that's. Sorry, that's me in technology. But I want to make sure that it can be condensed and not lose its integrity. And I want to be sure for myself that I'm not going to ruin the integrity of the music by what I have to do to make it fit that medium. And a quick story, I saved myself years ago from a lawsuit. In I think it was 1986. I was doing a transcription, not a transcription. I was going to arrange Child's Garden of Dreams for the marching band at Marion. And back in the late 80s, people didn't get permission generally to do transcriptions. Or do the marching band arrangements. We just, it was kind of people just thought that it didn't matter because it was marching band and not serious medium or something. I don't know. But, I had gotten the score from Dale Lannis up at Northwestern. And I was so excited because the music is brilliant. I mentioned it earlier too. And I thought it was going to be really perfect. And so I started tearing it apart and I was putting it together in marching band terms of 1986. And we got all the way to the beginning of September. And I couldn't take it anymore. And so we had a meeting and I told the band, guys, you can do whatever you want with the parts that I've already given you for Child's Garden. Just throw them away. We're starting over tomorrow, because I would have ruined it, and aside from the fact that if, since I hadn't gotten permission, David Maslenka would have rightfully sued me. Luckily, on that front, luckily I didn't do it. But the bigger thing was I was not doing the piece justice. And I think that still is a guard for me. And it's harder now even than it used to be. I think, we used to be able to do more and be competitive than we can now. And, one of the things now that I look at is can I make it and make it effective without having to add a bunch of nonsense? This is going to be a political statement. Forgive me, not political, but I want to make sure that I can make it be really effective and good and work for the marching band without having to write a bunch of added woodwind melismas on diatonic scales, so that we can just show that our woodwinds have all 10 fingers. And so when I look at it, I'm gonna.
Hey, you made it 26 minutes without your going that far. So I think this is a win, Greg. We've
well, that's
done really
good.
well.
Anyway, that's part of it, though. And those things all all combined. So I just take it all. It's a very serious, important thing for me. So
I think one of the big things that to kind of maybe put some of it in perspective that I always appreciated, you always would talk about honoring the composer. And I can remember there were several times you and I have talked about where you would meet the composer or something like that. And I knew that you always, the kind of integrity that you have, you always wanted to be able to honor their motives, even if you adjusted it for your band, because that's the other side of that I think is important. I've seen you like two things. First of all, I've seen you say, this is a great piece if you don't have to work on it that hard. Like if you have the talented players, it's great, but there's not quite enough meat to go there for the time. So if you have the great players, you can do it. And the second thing is I've seen you turn on a dime in both marching band and in concert band and say, I think the quote that I remember is, "I'll have to make them bloody if we do this piece."
yeah.
What he's saying is that, like, I will have to be so demanding of the kids that where their talent level is right now, that sure we can probably do it, but at what cost? That's important.
That was my comment about Child's Garden. Is we've had the trumpet section that could do it, but maybe not the oboe soloist that year. Or we've had an oboe soloist that year, but not the trumpet section. And so, like the year that we didn't have the oboe soloist, the rest of the band could have knocked it out. But the life of that oboe would have been terrible, and I just wouldn't do that. A real quick comment about composers and marching band arrangements. A friend of mine used to teach at the same town as Central Michigan, Mount Pleasant. He wrote to me and he said, "Greg, I'd like you to do an arrangement for me of," and I don't remember what the piece was, but it was one by David Gillingham. And I said, okay, you've got permission, right? And he said, I got permission and all that stuff. And so I started working on it. It was a percussion piece. It'll come to me.
Okay.
And I said, you got permission? He said, yeah. And so I'm working on it, and I sent it off to him and stuff. He said, oh, by the way, David Gillingham, his daughter is a French horn player in my band. And I just went, because you do your best, but you don't know. And I did get a chance to talk to him one time, and he really liked the arrangement. So I felt comfort, it's like, okay, I didn't mess up. So.
Well, Greg, we had another question in there next, but I think I'm going to skip to the third one, if that's okay with you, because I think this is important, especially for everybody that's on the call. When you first came to Marion Catholic, and luckily I was just reminded of this, there were about 70 students that were in the band club run by, as we talked about earlier, Sister Anna Clara, who was she a musician herself, or just
yeah, she could play piano.
That was the band director before Greg Bimm at Marion Catholic. And then you ended up with about 270, 280 students that were in the band. You won 7 Grand National Championships and been the class winner since 1980. You said that. And I can remember you telling me how important student leadership was in building the foundation of the program. You percussion.
You're breaking up. Is he breaking up for everybody?
Oh no! Yikes! Okay. Am I okay now?
Yeah. You're not moving, but
okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. I was saying that when you were at Marion, you only had yourself, a percussion director, someone to help with card, and maybe a couple of other people at most. And so you really won several of those championships with student leadership. So can you speak especially to those who don't have a leadership program in place about some of the things that you felt were pivotal and possibly any pitfalls that we might come across in developing a student leadership program?
Yes. There were only 3 of us. It was me, Ward Durrett, and Kerry Fund. And I just saw Ward out in Colorado, and he's still doing very, very well. And he was one of the things that was great about Ward is he's a brilliant jazz percussionist. and he was in the market with all the marching drums and stuff. But because he was a jazz drummer, he made time. Like, he was a very sensitive musician, so that his percussion stuff always made the band sound better. It always fit the music. It was always very musical, and he gave us time. Like, there was never an impact that wasn't set up. There was never any time. Like, everything was just like a really good jazz drummer would do. And so, and he still has that. We talked a lot about that when I saw him last week. But there were just the three of us, and I can remember specifically when the light really went off. It was 1982 at Summer Nationals, and the Norwind band was at Summer Nationals with LJ Hancock. And one of the things I have always done is just walked around and watched people, just observed and tried to, so I was watching. They arrived. We're in black and yellows. They're in coach buses, of course, because they came all the way from Pennsylvania. But and LJ was standing at the front of one of the buses, and he was sending sections off, and each one had an adult with them. Go with Mrs. Smith. Clarinets are going with Mr. Sims, and everybody had a professional person working with them. And I was like, we would never be in a place to do that. Like, we couldn't pay enough. We're in a we're not in a part of the city that's really conducive to that. All the universities are or most of the well, pretty much all the universities were north, like an hour and a half and stuff. And so we didn't have that. We didn't have a feeder system where we could draw the grade school band directors up or anything like that. And so we started to just lean on the students to help run rehearsals. The leadership came out of that in the form of all of our sections had section leaders, but every section was built in groups of 4. So it was like, if I had 28 clarinets, that was 7 squads of 4. So there's 1 section leader and 6 more squad leaders. And we always assigned seniors, and I'll get to that part in just a second. But it always started with seniors, as long as we had enough seniors to do that. And they simply had a job to do. It was their job to make sure that students knew their drill. It was their job to make sure that students knew their music. It was their job to make sure that students knew when to be at rehearsal. It was their job to make sure that their squad ran well, and that was all coordinated by the section leader. And it was all focused on simply getting a job done, all focused on responsibility and not glamour. And so that grew. As what happened was, as people started to see how one section leader could be really successful, they would start to imitate that. And so that went through, and all section leaders started to kind of work in some of the same ways. And a whole bunch of stuff happened along with that. Because the section leaders and squad leaders were involved and responsible for working with these small groups, or their group, they were totally invested. They took the responsibility, literally the responsibility. They felt guilty if their section wasn't doing its job. They felt like they were not doing their job if their section was not doing its job. And they took it very personally. And so they were totally invested. And that's, we would go out and have sectionals. There'd be 5 or 6 sectionals going on at one time. And we could just walk from one to the next and just watch what they were doing. Sometimes we could get involved if we had something specific that we wanted to do or say. I remember that what's Aaron's last name? There's a trumpet player, Aaron Fermanic. And you and I watched that sectional one day, and I remember you said to me, he's better than most of the band directors in the state, because he was really, really good. He just had a knack. But what happened is that became the culture. The culture at Marion was, the leadership of Marion is the section leaders and the squad leaders. drum majors, remember, we had to convince people to try out for drum major because they wanted to stay in their section. They would much rather be a section leader because they're right there in the trenches. They're the ones who are, toting the heavy load. And that to me was the big difference. Like the leadership stuff, we had a band president and all that, band officers, but they didn't have a lot to do. Every once in a while, we'd have somebody like Chip Kepler, who was a magician, but for the most part, it was section leaders who ran the band, who rehearsed the band. We would go, when we went to Grand Nationals, we'd have people look through the curtain because they'd hear all this chaos on the other side of the curtain in the musical warm-up, and they'd look through and they'd see all the circles of every section instead of the whole band surrounding one of the drum or one of the band directors and us warming them up. Every section was warming up by itself because that was their mode of operation. And we didn't want to change that. We didn't want to go, okay, now that we're Grand Nationals, we'll take over. We didn't need to do that. And so that it was, the leadership has been so successful because it's about responsibility. It's about shouldering the responsibility and caring about the responsibility and not about the glamour side. Like there's nobody that's a section leader or a squad leader for the glamour of it, because it's work, but it's a very proud work. And so I think that probably is the best way that you worked there for 13 years. So what did I miss?
Well, I do think that a key point to this, and people still don't believe me when I say this, we would get at some point somewhere between 40 to 60 freshmen. And I'll never forget, somewhere around 2000, maybe 9 or 12, the band was especially good. And I remember Greg would do interviews with incoming freshmen, not auditions, interviews. And it literally was whatever you'd like to play any scales you may know, any piece of music from band last year, because Marion doesn't have a feeder. There were about 75 different parochial and public schools that fed Marion. You rarely had more than about 5 kids from the same school that would come in. And so they didn't know each other, but they also didn't have very much running. But I'll never forget, Greg came in and said, man, the freshman class is really good. I said, yeah? He goes, yeah, there were 9 of them that could play 2 scales. Like, that's huge for us. We were so excited about that.
And they could tongue.
That
was always a checkpoint.
He does a clinic called From Hot Cross Buns to Hindemith about Ikel Coleman, who came in and literally played ha, 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 ha. And then he's got a recording of him playing in the trumpet section for the Hindemith Symphony his senior year.
You made a mistake there. Ikel, when he came in, his trumpet was down here. He played electric clarinet.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, he was terrible.
Yes, he was just awful.
By his own admission.
Yes, he would agree. But I think that the point that's salient about that is it was the responsibility of that squad leader to make sure that freshman could play. And that started with, here's fingering charts. Here is this. Like, I think that most of those section leaders at Marion could pass the first semester of music education classes because of the on-the-job stuff. I think what's great about that, Greg, is that it was something that had to take a while to develop. And that was the thing that I learned a lot from you is, we can plant the seeds for things, but sometimes the kids need time to just simmer and percolate. And we can't force that or rush it. So
if I was going to do it again, like if I walked in and we were at that same 1982 place, I would make sure that I thought about the early guidance, and I probably was doing that anyway, because we would tell the kid back then, we would say, make sure you work on this. If I was going to go into a band cold right now and try to invest in that, I would only do a small block of time. Like I'd say, okay, clarinets, I need you. You're going to go over there with section leader Susie, and I want you to work on these 4 bars. Susie, I want you to go slow first. You're going to play like quarter notes. And then you're going to move it to eighth notes, but make sure that everybody has the right fingerings, make sure whatever things that make sure they're all tonguing at the, and slurring the same way. Just do it slowly and then speed it up. I need you to take 10 minutes. Don't work on anything else. Just do exactly that. I want you to start this way. And I would tell the leader that in front of everybody, because the leader then would be empowered by me to lead those clarinets through what they were going to do. And then that can gradually go to, can you work on this section, Susie? That can gradually go, you're going to take 15 minutes. And then, it will finally grow into what you and I had, where they would turn in, a section.
Practice lines.
Essentially, yeah, it's a lesson plan.
Mm-hmm. And it was, I have to tell you, some of those that the kids turned in were just incredible. The final part that I think is so good is discipline. Was almost there wasn't a discipline. The kids took a lot of pride in handling their own stuff. And I don't mean that in a nasty way, like we're going to do push-ups. It was just, there's a responsibility, like you said. And we'd empowered the students, like if somebody doesn't do what you're asking, just send them to us or come and get us. You're not the disciplinarian. That's not your job.
If you remember the rule, it was section leaders. If somebody is not doing what they're supposed to do, you bring them to us. You just come in and let us know, and we'll take care of it. But the membership, like the other people in the squad, they had two choices. They could either do exactly what they were directed to do by their leader, or they could come in and tell us that they were not going to and why. So if the section leader was a total mess up and was going to have them march in traffic or something like that, you don't go march in traffic. You come and say, hey, listen, they're trying to get us to march in traffic. And so that empowered on both sides, so that there was no power play in any way. It was just simply a matter, we have a job to get done. Let's just go do our job. And it is a big thing with the discipline that was there and the responsibility that everybody got in. That was just the culture that grew. The younger kids came in and they saw the older kids acting in a certain responsible way, and they just grew into that same responsibility as well. So
yeah. Well, Greg, our last formal question here, and folks, please be thinking about questions you may want to ask Greg. If we have time to go into small groups, we will, or we may just open it up here at the end. This one is Greg and I choke each other up, and it's a little bit of a contest to see who can make it through answers without, having some sort of emotional breakdown. But Greg, you've been a mentor to me and so many others. If you've ever seen my daughters, he's their godfather. Like we're pretty close. Who were some of the people you looked to in your first 10 years, and what things did they do to inspire, encourage, or guide you?
The first person that I need to mention is my student teaching supervisor. His name is Bruce Hammett. When I went to student teaching, I had no tools, just a bullish set of shoulders that I would run through any brick wall that stood between me and making the band better. Like my goal was to make the band play good no matter what. And that meant that anything between me and there has a potential of getting hurt. And I say that laughing now, but it was true. I was just a bull in a china shop without any tools, but more than without any tools, without a boundary. Like I really, I'll give you an example to clarify. And Bruce, aside from, he really introduced me to competitive marching, and we would sit in his garage for hours on end listening to band music. There weren't a lot of recordings back then, but he had that whole set of 28 educational reference records. It's a black and orange thing, real vinyl records, and we would listen to those at end, or just without end. But he would ask questions along the way. At one point, he said to me, okay, Greg, it is band camp And on Friday of band camp, Johnny he has come to you and he's asked you to miss band camp that day so that he can take his cow to the 4-H fair and show his cow. What are you going to do? And my answer was immediate. I'm just going to throw him out of band. If he ain't going to show up for my rehearsal, he has no business being in band. And so Bruce he smiled and he said, I understand. He said, now, if you think about it, he is going to be a farmer when he grows up. He is going to grow cattle when he grows up. His whole life has been centered around farming and growing cattle. So you've just told him that his whole life is meaningless and doesn't mean as much as a rehearsal in band. And you have completely taken music out of his life a year before it was going to be necessary for him. Like you're taking a whole year of music out of his life. So how is that a win? And he wasn't aggressive, but it was like, oh. And it was a matter of just taking things and saying, you know what? It's not black and white. There's gray here, and there are humans involved. And your job really is working with and teaching music to those humans in the process. And I've always believed this. One of the parts of that is making music at the highest possible level is what makes it valuable to the students. It's not like you compromise the level because you want the kid to show his cow. That's just, you look at two really heavy things. I want the band to be great, but I want him to be a great human being too. I want him to know that his life as a farmer is important and is valuable as all that. You have to work on those balances. And so Bruce was a big part of that for me, especially my first couple of years, because back then there was no internet. There was no, the best you could do is pick up a phone and talk to somebody. You couldn't find information on how to change a drum head. Like right now, if I wanted to find how to change a drum head, I could just click and I'd probably find 16 different ways because everybody has their own method, I think. So that didn't happen. And I leaned heavily on my high school band directors. They were both brilliant, both separate personalities. One was a very pure musician, like a gut level musician, and one was a very intellectual musician. And I leaned on both of them, and I learned so much from both of them. One of the things, though, that I'm really shy. I know that I'm blabbing here a lot, but I'm not one to just go up and talk to. I just don't do that. And so as I was going through those first years of teaching, I wasn't one to go to somebody that was a hero and talk to them. John Painter he would be one of the guys that I would say was a strong mentor to me. But later on, we became friends, and he became more of a mentor. Like we had conversations and things. But early on, he was a mentor without knowing he was a mentor. Basically, I stalked him. Wherever he was, I would be around there. He was conducting the All-State Band in Springfield in 1984, 83 or 84. And I was working with the IME. I was doing all the equipment. So I was moving pianos and music stands and drums and stuff all over the place and setting up video, believe that or not, but they're the old 16 millimeter kinds. I could do those. And so I was doing all of that, but every time I had to go and take something from one place to another, I made sure that my route passed the band rehearsal. And I would stop at the doorway because it was a small room. Now, one of the reasons they left Springfield and go to Peoria was the rehearsal rooms were terrible, small, low ceiling and stuff. And I could look right in the door, and John Painter was right there. And he always had this little bit of a hunch, when he was rehearsing, but he's brilliant. And so he would, I'd just stop and walk in the door for a minute and listen to whatever I could hear, and then I'd go on my way. There was one point where I think he figured out that I've been there a lot of times because he was conducting, and you saw him from the side, and all of a sudden he just went and then looked back. But what I was doing, I was just trying to absorb as much as I possibly could about how he did things and how he got to be as good at what he was doing, you know, like what it was that made him that, all of those things. And so I was honestly too shy to call anybody on the phone. I ended up bumping into people along the way. Dale Hopper was a good mentor to me because he was such a good guy. He's the guy that built the Hersher program that was so strong in the late 70s. He had a small school of 500, and he had I think 2 concert bands, an orchestra, 2 jazz bands, all of them successful, and a very successful marching band of like 170. So he was really the deal, and he did his own arrangements. And Dale was the first guy to write a book on corps style marching when that was just coming into its own, like way back in the late 70s. But I ended up getting to meet Dale, and we got to be very good friends, especially in those early years. He would let me come to his house and just look through his scores. You know, you can't, now you can just send a computer file and stuff, but then they were all handwritten scores in just a big old file cabinet. And he'd just send me to the basement, let me stay as long as I wanted to look through scores. And, you know, so I think the cool thing is now is I realize that I didn't need to be shy. I could have gone up and talked to anybody. And I often tell people, do that. Just go up, and you see somebody that you want to know or that you want to hear something from, just go and ask, because everybody will talk to you. You know, all the people that you bump into along the way, you just find out that they're just good folks, you know.
I think one of the things I remember you telling me one time was, I think it was Ravelli, I think, that told you to wear out the seat of your pants.
Studying scores.
Studying scores. I remember.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I got to meet him when I was doing graduate work at Western. And he said that then, and there was we were watching a band play the Alcotts by Ives, and everything was perfectly lined up, you know, but the conductor was just really lining everything up. And Ravelli was sitting next to me. He's, you know, smaller than me. He leaned over and said, "What's wrong with that band?" And I said, and so I started to shred as best I possibly. Well, the French horns are just a little bit sharp, and I went on with like 2 or 3 more things, and he just went, no. And I was like, oh boy. And he just said they're over regimented. Basically, this incredible director that is known to be tyrannical and such a, you know, a control freak was saying this band is being over controlled. They're not being allowed to be musical. And that was, you know, that lit some lights for me too. It's like, oh, that's a whole different way of looking at things, isn't it? You know, so.
Well, I want to finish with this, because I think this is, Greg's talked a lot about his musical stuff, and he sometimes comes across as being a grumbly kind of grouch in there. I'm going to bust this wall. Greg's one of the most gentle people you're ever going to see, especially in front of a band. Now, when it got serious, but I would say that happened maybe once in a blue moon. But I want to tell you about the first time that it happened when I saw it. I came to Marion Catholic in 2001. I'd never marched drum corps. I had no business being at that school teaching. And he'd sent me out with the band to do visual with them for about 4 days. And I had no idea what I was doing. Thankfully, the leaders were so strong, I could just say, "Hey, what do y'all do now?" They said, "Well, we should probably do some forward 8." Okay. How do y'all do that? Like, and these kids, God love them. They were just like, okay, so we got to help the new guy out. And here we are. But like, we did this for 4 days, and Greg came out and saw it. And I thought, oh God, here, I'm going to get fired, because they were the reigning national champions. And we looked like, you know, not great at that time. And Greg said, "Bobby, I need to speak to everybody right now." I was like, oh my, like, okay, he's going to fire me in front of everybody. I don't know if you knew that, Greg, or not, but I swore you were going to fire me in front of the entire band. But he had a plastic bag. We had just finished lunch, and we were right back outside. He had this plastic bag, and he said, I need everybody's attention. I need you. And when Marion listens to Greg, it's absolute silence. When any adult walks to the front of the podium in that band room, the pin, you can hear a pin drop. But they were focused, and he just pulled out this plastic bag, and he was standing right beside the drum major podium, and he pulled out 3 McDonald's bags and set them on the podium. And we talked. I won't go too far into all that he said, but we talked for about 20 minutes about the way that we treat our area is the way that we treat ourselves and our music and our performance. And if we can't do better than that, there's no reason for us to continue doing what we're doing. And the big takeaway that I got from that, and you told the Lee Porter story, which is famous, and it's one of my favorite stories. If you ever see Greg, ask him to tell you the Lee Porter story. But he told this to the kids, and they were just riveted by this. And I remember thinking, I bet he never had as serious a conversation with them about winning anything ever. But if you trashed the band room, if you were disrespectful, if you, I really had a moment in that day going like, oh, so it's not about how fast they can play B flat concert. It's not about how high they can play or how soft, but it really is about what kind of people that we're making. And I can remember as a first year director, I'd be like, now, should I say something about this? Or that, like, what would Greg do? And honestly, that's kind of how I deal with my band now. Like, what would Greg say to this? It's always, if you make great people, great things come out of that. And so, Greg, thank you very much. And I bet we probably have some questions that are here. Cecilia, how would you like us to continue on?
Scott, I shot his hand up in the air right away.
I have one quick question. Greg, you're the only person that I know who's been referred to as a band director, Mr. Bimm, on Grey's Anatomy. You want to talk about that briefly?
It is true. I was when I found out about this, I was actually writing drill at one end of our house, and no TV or anything like that. It was in the fall, and I was, of course, like always, I was behind. I'm sure I was writing Marion's drill because I was way behind. But I got a call from somebody on the East Coast, and they said, "Greg, are you watching Grey's Anatomy?" I said, "No, it's October, or it's September. I'm writing drill," and they said, "I think they just said your name." And so I went down and saw my wife. I said, "Connie, you're what? Did they say?" She said, "Yeah, I think they did." And come to find out, well, it was Shonda Rhimes, the creator of Grey's Anatomy and all those other things. She was in our band. She graduated from Marion in 1987. She was an oboe player and in color guard. And my wife taught her in grade school, at a little Catholic grade school in Park Forest, Illinois. And so she had moved on. She's incredibly successful now, obviously. But the storyline of that episode was a girl was in a parade and she passed out. And so they brought her to the hospital, and the director of the bands, Mr. Bimm, sent the band president and the section leader, I think it was, to the hospital. And the only thing that I can remember, well, I can remember 2 quotes. I think they said it 3 different times, but one was the doctor said, "She'll be okay. We'll take care of her now. You guys can leave." And they say, "Oh no, Mr. Bimm said we have to stay." And then at the very end, the girl is better. They fixed her, and she's all there. She's all better. And the 2 kids are still there. And they come in and they say, "Mr. Bimm called. We didn't get the trophy." So my daughter actually has a really good friend who every time she sees me, she says, "We didn't get the trophy." So. But yeah, and I often share that with
awesome.
honor bands and stuff. Just like you don't know who's around you, you should take the time to know and appreciate everybody that's around you. One of the things that I talk about with honor bands is make sure you know who you're sitting next to. So I sat in an honor band 1 chair away from a guy named Jerry Hay, a trumpet player who played for Michael Jackson, and hundreds of albums. Like, he was the guy on the West Coast as an arranger, worked with Quincy Jones. He played on, I think it was on Thriller, but I know he played for Michael Jackson, a bunch of other people. And he played on film scores. He played for all of the Back to the Future movies and stuff like that. So he's like a huge name on the West Coast. Absolutely, I'd say that little note about Quincy Jones, I know I know people who played in honor bands with Chris Martin, and so I always mention, take the time to look around you, because you don't know who's going to be there, whether it's going to be a great player somewhere in the future, or it could be a movie star, or a Hollywood person like Shonda. So it's important to take the time to know people, to just be aware. So
Greg, in addition to taking the time to get to know the people and being aware, listening to great music, which you've talked about tonight, what is something that you could share with all of us that you think is part of the secret to your longevity in this field? We've got pre-service teachers in the room. We've got teachers in the room entering their third and fourth decade. How do we keep at it like you have? You've been such a great model for that. What's the secret?
I don't know that I have a secret. I just love doing band, and I always have loved doing band. From high school on. It has been, and it has never been a burden. It's never been something that it's just like who I am. So it's as natural as breathing, kind of. So I know there's all kinds of talk these days about burnout and stuff like that. I've never, in one day, I taught for 49 years, and not one day of those 49 years did I feel that I was burnout. Not one day did I feel, there were days when I felt rough, tired, or upset with the way things were going, or something like that. But I do know that nearly every time that I was on the podium, it was cathartic to me. Like, my best moments, I may be having the worst possible day, but the 45 minutes or the hour on the podium working in the rehearsal was magnificent. And maybe there's something there too, because I prefer rehearsing to performing. Mm-hmm. I would much rather just be standing in front of a band digging away. And so if you offer me a chance to spend an hour working with the Marine Band, or an hour working with the Homewood Flossmoor Band across the town from us, and I used them specifically because I didn't want to say Marion, because obviously I have a tie to Marion. But if you offer me an hour to work with Homewood Flossmoor or an hour to work with Marines, I choose Homewood Flossmoor in a heartbeat, every day. It's just you and the music, and reaching in and making it better. Like, whatever it is, you may not make it really good on any given day. Sometimes you do. Like right now, David is on my screen, and I've heard his band just smoking good. And so sometimes you make it really good. Sometimes it's just you make a little bit of. Sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes you just have a moment where all the minds meet, or something. Mm-hmm. But looking forward to that every day has just, if I had a young body, I'd go for 40 more years. But at 72, I have to rest a little bit sometimes. So
I would say this about Greg. He never believed his own popularity. Or his own publicity. Maybe that's the right way to say it. I can remember we've painted fields together. We've built props together. We've cleaned the floor together. And I can remember, like, the first time I went to his office, I was like, I just took the interview there because I wanted to meet Greg Bimm. I had no delusion that I was going to get the job. but I went there just to meet him, and I thought, this is. I mean, I have a picture of myself standing outside the band room, like, hey, I came to Marion Catholic, and all I got was this T-shirt. Like that's what I was. That's what I thought it was. That's all I thought it was going to be, and I saw you like. Greg Bimm has never called himself the director of bands at Marion Catholic High School. I remember he used to gristle at that.
The conductor of bands.
The conductor of bands.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm not Greg Bimm conductor. I'm band director.
Band director, and that's. I think that there is something to that when it comes to. I think sometimes we feel like, man, I just can't do this anymore. It's not like it's a new challenge. This is the 10th time we've had to go through parent conferences, or the 10th time we've had to, redo something that's really challenging. And I never saw him. It was like, if I do that, then I get to do the music. If I build this prop, I get to do that. If I have this parent conference, I get to do what I love to do. And I think I mean, for me, going into year 25, that's one of the challenges I face now. So, sorry.
It is, as far as at our best, we are all just trench workers. In my opinion, we just all get up and go do band, and I love being a part of that.
Tim, I know you're going to look at me cross when I say, I think we're going to have to wrap it up for this evening.
Okay. Greg, it's good to see you, friend. I love you, pal.
Nice to see you, buddy.
And he's everything that everybody said times 10, multiply it times 2, and then times infinity on top of that. So it's good to see you. Tell Connie and the family hi.
You bet.
And to each and every one of you, thank you. It's always a joy to be in the presence of an icon who is just one of us. Did that make sense?
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. This was really fun.
Oh, man. You have an invitation to come back anytime you want.
You bet.
Cecilia, wrap it up and tell everybody good night.
Anytime you want, Greg. I'm sure everyone would be really grateful to spend more time with you. And I hope that you'd be willing to perhaps share an email address or some way for us to get in touch with you,
Sure.
Since we didn't all get a chance to visit and ask questions in case there's any follow-up. I'm sure that Greg will make himself available. And when you come up to the Midwest Clinic in December, look for him. He'll be standing near the boxes of scores.
No doubt.
So next week, team, we aren't going to be here together as a Slamily because your Slam board of directors is going to be having our fall meeting. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. All right. Thanks again, Greg. Thank you, everyone. Be
Thank you.
well.
Good night, everyone.